One person can shut down the internet for an entire army. Elon Musk has openly admitted to occasionally disabling the Starlink satellite system, and that directly affected real combat operations. Poland's Ministry of Digital Affairs pays about $50 million every year just so Ukrainian military forces can use this network. $50 million for access to a service originally designed to help a farmer in Nebraska check the weather forecast. What started as a private satellite network aimed at bringing internet to remote places has become a military asset, and its owner now holds a level of influence no general commands in any army on Earth. But here's what really grabs your attention. Starlink is just the surface. Beyond the civilian network, SpaceX is quietly building something else entirely. It's called Starshield. In 2021, the National Military Space Intelligence Agency, the American body responsible for spy satellites, set aside $1.8 billion for it. Not for Starlink, not for schools, not for farmers, for a classified military satellite constellation. What exactly hides behind this contract? How does this secret military network connect to the civilian Starlink, the one providing internet to fishermen in Fiji? And why could Starshield's existence change the balance of power, both in space and here on Earth, forever? To answer that, we first need to understand what lies on the surface, grasp how the light is built, and only then will the shadow come into view. Now, contrast. During the internet blockade that Israel imposed on the Gaza Strip, Starlink received permission to operate in exactly one location, one hospital. The only communication channel for all humanitarian workers in the entire region. This isn't a promotional flyer. It's a real situation where a satellite signal from space became a fragile lifeline between people and aid. Here, technology that had just been a tool of war suddenly saves lives. The same network, the same satellites. And there are dozens of stories like this. In remote villages on Fiji and the Solomon Islands, Starlink connects schools where no underwater cable reaches. Kids gain access to digital learning platforms. In places where just 5 years ago, the only source of knowledge was a worn-out teacher with a battered textbook and a piece of chalk. There's no fiber optic cable, no cell towers, only the sky, and a small white dish on the school's roof. In 2024, a magnitude 7.3 earthquake struck Vanuatu. The island nation's only underwater cable, their lifeline to the outside world, was severed. No phones, no coordination among rescue teams, no information about those affected. To me, this stands as one of the clearest examples of why an orbital network matters. Starlink rerouted 300 satellites to restore emergency communications. 300. Not just one backup device, a whole swarm of orbital access points deployed over the archipelago in mere hours. And all of this is part of a service that now boasts over 5,400,000 subscribers across more than 100 countries. Its estimated annual revenue tops $3.2 billion. To put that in perspective, it's more than the entire budget of India's space agency. Simply put, Starlink is no longer an experiment or a startup. It has become a global infrastructure that educates children, coordinates rescue teams, and generates billions. But behind this flawless front, schools in Fiji, a hospital in Gaza, rescuers in Vanuatu, there quietly operates a parallel network. It has a different name, a different client, and missions that SpaceX prefers to keep under wraps, while the Pentagon remains silent. To understand what's really being built behind this facade, we need to look at blueprints clearly never meant for the public eye. This parallel network is called Starshield. It's not Starlink with a military label. It's not a secret version of the civilian service. Starshield is a separate constellation of satellites in low Earth orbit, built from the ground up for defense purposes. From the first bolt to the last byte of data, the United States government controls it completely. The civilian Starlink and Starshield share the same manufacturer. They launch on the same rocket. They might even roll off the same assembly line at the factory in Redmond, Washington. But the customer is different, and so are the missions. Who's funding this? The answer came out even before the project went public. In 2021, the National Military Space Intelligence Agency, the part of the U.S. system responsible for spy satellites, allocated $1.8 billion to the Starshield program. To put that in perspective, that's more than the entire annual budget of the Chicago Police Department. This wasn't a research grant. It wasn't an investment expecting returns. It was a targeted contract from the intelligence community to build orbital military infrastructure. So, long before most people even heard the name Starshield, the intelligence agencies already knew exactly what they were buying. Let's take a closer look at what makes these satellites so valuable to the military. Each Starshield satellite is built on a modular design. The body is standard, but the payload inside changes depending on the mission. One satellite might carry secure communications gear, turning it into a node of a military network that's impossible to intercept. Another could be packed with sensors to monitor the Earth's surface, tracking the movement of vehicles or ships. A third might house an early warning system for missile attacks, detecting the heat signature of a ballistic missile's engine in the first few seconds after launch. The fourth could handle target designation, sending coordinates directly to strike forces. In other words, this isn't just one type of satellite with a single job. It's a customizable platform able to become anything from a telescope to a guided weapons controller. And these aren't just concepts on paper. The 2nd Marine Division of the United States Marine Corps, one of the oldest combat units, stationed at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, is already using Starshield technology. In the field, tasks like communication, unit coordination, and target designation once depended on bulky ground stations or vulnerable geostationary satellites. Then, in 2023, SpaceX signed a separate one-year contract worth $70 million with the United States Space Force. Established in 2019 as the youngest branch of the military, the Space Force stands among the first clients of this system, which hasn't even been officially introduced to the public yet. Intelligence funds it, Marines use it, the Space Force signs the contracts. This isn't happening in glossy presentations or investor press releases. It's unfolding in combat schedules and the Pentagon's budget lines. But how do you build and launch hundreds of these satellites without anyone spotting the difference between a civilian and a military mission? The answer might already be flying above us. In every batch of 60 satellites that the Falcon 9 rockets send into orbit with alarming regularity. 12,000. That's how many man-made objects are currently orbiting Earth. Imagine if each one were a light bulb. Then the night sky would look like the ceiling of a shopping mall. Dense, uniform, without a single dark corner. But here's what makes this number truly strange. More than 7,000 of those 12,000 belong to just one company. Not a government, not an alliance. A single private company based in Hawthorne, California. SpaceX controls over 60% of everything flying above our heads. All other countries and corporations combined share the rest. And here's the question that haunts me. How did one organization manage to fill near-Earth space more densely than all of humanity did in the previous 60 years of the space age? The story begins in 2015. That's when the Starlink project was announced, with what now seems like a modest goal: 4,000 satellites in low Earth orbit. Low orbit means an altitude between 160 and 2,000 kilometers above the surface. Below that, the atmosphere drags satellites down and burns them up. Above that is medium orbit, which has different physics and longer signal delays. Starlink chose the sweet spot, 550 kilometers. High enough that satellites won't burn up in a week, low enough for signals to reach Earth in mere milliseconds. By 2020, a few hundred satellites were already in orbit. By 2022, that number grew into the thousands. Now, in 2024, there are over 7,000 satellites circling Earth. And filings with the Federal Communications Commission show plans for 42,000 satellites. Not a typo, 42,000 satellites, more than 3.5 times the total number humanity has ever launched into orbit in all of history. And that's just one company's plan. Numbers can feel abstract until you realize what's actually flying up there. Each latest generation satellite isn't just a box the size of a suitcase, as many assume. It stretches 30 meters long. Imagine a 9-story building laid on its side. It weighs about as much as a small car. And the Falcon 9 rocket lifts up to 60 of these cars in a single launch. 60 vehicles stacked inside the rocket's fairing, like plates in a dishwasher. The rocket blasts off, the fairing opens, and those 60 flat plates spread out like a fan. Each unfolds solar panels and climbs to its working orbit. It's a conveyor belt, not handcrafted, but industrial-scale manufacturing in space. And this is where Starlink, in my view, becomes fundamentally different. Not just a massive swarm of hardware drifting in orbit. Each of these satellites carries 3 laser terminals. Not radio antennas for communication, but lasers. Thin infrared beams link one satellite to its neighbors, creating a seamless network. Data travels at the speed of light through the vacuum, literally faster than fiber optic cables on Earth, since light slows down by about a third in glass. Beyond the lasers, there are 8 phased array antennas for communicating with ground terminals, and ion thrusters powered by argon gas handle maneuvering. Argon is an inert gas that gets ionized and accelerated by an electric field. The thrust is tiny, less than the pressure your palm exerts on a table. But in the vacuum of space, that's enough to shift orbits, dodge debris, climb higher, or drop lower. Here's a paradox. 7,000 satellites, each the size of a house, equipped to fire lasers at their neighbors and dodge collisions on their own. Every 5 minutes, one of them is performing an emergency avoidance maneuver somewhere right above your head. The onboard computer spots the threat, calculates the trajectory, and fires the engine without human input. But what happens when, out of 42,000 satellites, this system makes just one mistake? Still, there's something even more important right now. Laser communication between satellites isn't just an engineering trick for internet connectivity. No other company in the world operates this technology at such a massive scale. 7,000 nodes linked by beams of light, forming a single mesh network that blankets the entire planet without a single ground cable connecting them. This is a working, proven system, carrying millions of users every day, a prototype for something far bigger. This much bigger network already exists. It's called Starshield. Here's what makes this connection truly inseparable. The Starlink and Starshield systems can share the exact same inter-satellite laser terminals to create high-speed data channels. Not similar, not comparable, identical. The very laser terminal that's right now streaming your video through a chain of satellites over the Atlantic can just as easily send an encrypted intelligence packet from a battlefield to the Pentagon command center. Physically, it's the same device. The difference lies in the software and who's on the receiving end. In simple terms, the military network isn't hidden in a separate constellation of secret satellites. It grows out of the same foundational technology as the civilian internet. Here's where the real mystery starts for anyone trying to assess the military potential of an orbital network from the outside. You'd expect the biggest military powers to have their own versions if this technology is so crucial for defense. Dozens of companies competing for contracts, alternative suppliers. But no, SpaceX openly claims it's the only operator using laser communication technology in space on an industrial scale. The only one on the entire planet. 7,000 nodes linked by beams of light, and not a single competitor has come close to that level of deployment. It's like there's just one factory in the world that can make bulletproof vests, and that same factory also sells hiking jackets. Both made from the same Kevlar, using the same machines and the same hands. They just have different labels. Let's circle back to those laser terminals we mentioned earlier. Each satellite carries 3 of them. Infrared beams cutting through the vacuum of space. At first, it sounded like a technical detail. Neat, but just one of many. Now, it's clear that this detail forms the very core of the whole dual-purpose design. Not the satellite's body, not the ion engine, not the phased antenna, the laser. Because you can't intercept a laser beam without physically blocking its path. Unlike radio signals, it doesn't scatter. It travels point to point, just a few centimeters wide, across thousands of miles. For military communications, this isn't just convenient, it's a game changer. Now, The key takeaway this all leads to: every day, when a farmer in Montana downloads a weather forecast through Starlink, when a fishing trawler in the Norwegian Sea tracks a school of fish, or when a vlogger in Indonesia streams live from a village without cell towers, each connection proves one simple fact to the Pentagon: the technology works, reliably, under pressure, in any condition. The successful, large-scale use of laser communication in the Starlink network stands as clear proof of its dependability for the potential clients of Starshield. 4 million subscribers across 75 countries. That's not just a customer base. It's the most expensive and ambitious demonstration platform in the history of defense technology. And the users themselves pay for it. Here's a paradox. The more popular Starlink becomes as a commercial product, the stronger its case as a military platform. Growing the subscriber base isn't just about revenue. It builds a track record of reliability that generals can actually use. No sovereign nation can replicate this setup on its own, because first, they would have to launch their own constellation of thousands of satellites. That means relying on a single private provider isn't just a temporary hassle, it's a structural trap. And this trap has already snapped shut. Once the technology was tested in civilian hands, it quickly found a role on the battlefield. But in a real conflict, no one paused to ask which satellite was peaceful and which wasn't. February of 2022. In the opening hours of the full-scale invasion, Russian strikes cripple Ukraine's communication hubs. Cellular towers go up in flames. Fiber optic cables get severed. Brigade commanders lose contact with their headquarters. Artillery spotters can't relay coordinates. Then, small white boxes with flat antennas start arriving at the front lines. Starlink. These terminals connect within minutes, needing no towers or ground infrastructure, just a clear patch of sky overhead. The signal beams straight to orbit. Within weeks, these terminals show up everywhere. In the trenches near Bakhmut, command posts deep in basements, on drones adjusting fire in real time. Elon Musk himself called the Starlink system the backbone of the Ukrainian army. Not just a backup, not a handy extra, the backbone. Remember the story about bringing internet to the most remote corners of the world? The one about farmers, fishermen, and bloggers? That beautiful tale has come to an end. What followed was a very different reality. A civilian network designed for streaming videos and checking weather forecasts transformed into a vital military asset. And it's not free. Poland's Ministry of Digital Affairs pays about $50 million a year for the Ukrainian armed forces to use Starlink. $50 million isn't humanitarian aid, it's a contract. A military contract with a private company that answers to no general staff anywhere on the planet. And who answers to her? One person. Elon Musk admitted that he sometimes turned the system off, and that could have influenced the course of military operations. Not a general, not the defense secretary, not the commander of the joint staff. The company's owner, sitting in Austin, Texas, decided whether a frontline unit would have communication that night or not, whether drone targeting would work, whether the counteroffensive could be coordinated at all. How did it come to this? That the outcome of modern battles and the national security of sovereign nations hinge on the choices of a single private individual. Put simply, no government on Earth can order Musk to turn this service on or off. They can ask, they can pay, they can pressure. But ordering? No. For countries caught in conflict, relying on a private company for decisions that literally determine their fate is more than a strategic inconvenience. It is an existential threat. This isn't an isolated case. It's a tectonic shift. Private companies like SpaceX, powered by their technology, now have a seat at the table in military and political debates that were once off limits to anyone outside government offices. A corporation that started with commercial launches now sits alongside the Pentagon and intelligence agencies, not as a contractor, but as a partner, without whom the military machine grinds to a halt. Now here's the most alarming part. The technological link between Starlink and Starshield runs so deep that you can't physically separate them anymore. They're the same satellites, the same laser communication channels, the same orbital network. For an adversary, there's no distinction between a civilian Starlink and a military one. It's a single, unified system. If this network directs artillery fire and coordinates strikes, then the entire system, every one of the more than 6,000 satellites, becomes a legitimate military target. Every satellite that lets a student in Brazil watch lessons or a doctor in Kenya provide telemedicine can, in theory, be destroyed, because it's technically indistinguishable from those carrying combat data. A single collision in orbit can create a cloud of debris. These fragments travel so fast that a bolt the size of a nut can pierce through a spacecraft's hull. But more on that later. For now, one thing is clear. The line between civilian and military in space has blurred, and it wasn't an enemy who erased it. The system's very design, one that a single person can activate or shut down before bedtime, did. 100,050. That's how many avoidance maneuvers Starlink satellites performed over the course of a year, ending in November 2024. Break it down by the minute, and that's one maneuver every 5 minutes, around the clock. No breaks, no weekends. Every 5 minutes, somewhere above us, an algorithm detects a potential collision and nudges a satellite out of harm's way. This isn't emergency mode. It's the standard operating routine. Here's the interesting part. In 2024, SpaceX tightened its own collision response threshold. Before, they would initiate a maneuver if the chance of collision was 1 in 10,000. That's NASA's standard. Now, they've pushed that threshold to 1 in a million. That sounds like a safety upgrade, but in practice, it means satellites are darting around dozens of times more often. Every maneuver changes a satellite's path. That new path has to be recalculated, shared with every other satellite operator, and updated in the tracking catalogs. The orbit turns into a busy intersection with no traffic lights, where every driver suddenly swerves without warning their neighbors. And that raises a simple-sounding, but chilling question. What happens if the autopilot makes a mistake, even just once? The answer to this question came long before Starlink ever existed. In 1978, a NASA scientist named Don Kessler published a paper predicting that, within 30 to 40 years, low Earth orbit would fill up with so much debris that collisions would become unavoidable. Not just likely, unavoidable. By 2008, exactly 30 years later, an American Iridium satellite collided with a defunct Russian Cosmos satellite. It was the first accidental crash between two intact spacecraft in history. Kessler's warning was coming true, almost to the year. What he described is now known as the Kessler syndrome. It works like a chain reaction, like dominoes falling. Two objects collide. The impact creates a cloud of debris. Each piece then follows its own orbit and can smash into another spacecraft. That one shatters, spawning even more fragments. This cascade can turn an entire orbital belt into an impassable hazard. Right now, satellites track more than 25,000 pieces of space junk larger than 4 inches. But that's only what radar can see. Experts estimate there are over 1 million fragments between 1 and 4 inches across. 1 million invisible shards, each speeding through space at over 15,000 miles per hour. At that velocity, even a tiny paint fleck can dent a spacecraft's window. A cherry-sized aluminum fragment can pierce a station's hull like a sniper's bullet, only traveling 8 times faster. On November 15, 2021, Russia tested an anti-satellite missile called the A-235 Noodle. The target? One of its own old satellites, the Cosmos 1408, launched back in 1982. The missile struck dead on target. The satellite shattered into pieces. Over 1,500 trackable fragments formed, each orbiting independently, each following its own path. That day, the crew aboard the International Space Station had to take shelter in their return capsules. The debris cloud came alarmingly close. These fragments will threaten space operations for years, some for decades. One missile fired, 1,500 new hazards added to orbit, and the problem isn't shrinking, it's only getting bigger. SpaceX stands as the biggest player, but it's far from the only one. China is developing its own constellation called Gowang, planning to launch 13,000 satellites. Amazon is building its own network, Kuiper. OneWeb is already deploying satellites into orbit. Every company, every country is adding more devices to the same crowded space. But orbit isn't infinite. It's limited, like a highway. And no matter how many cars hit that road, the number of lanes doesn't grow. Meanwhile, we're told that retired satellites safely burn up in the atmosphere. A clean solution, neat disposal. But what actually remains after 250 kilograms of aluminum and electronics break apart in the upper layers of air? For some reason, that part of the story is told much more quietly. 4 years, sometimes 5. That's how long a single Starlink satellite stays in orbit. Then its engines fire one last time, the satellite descends, and it burns up, entering the atmosphere. This isn't a malfunction, it's planned obsolescence built right into the design. Each of the thousands of satellites is made expecting to be replaced, so every 4 to 5 years, the entire network needs an overhaul, launching thousands of new satellites and retiring thousands of old ones. It's a conveyor belt that never stops. And here's what they tell us: don't worry. SpaceX claims their satellites completely burn up upon re-entry, cleanly, without a trace. A precise cremation at about 50 miles up. Here's the surprising part. A study published in the journal Nature reveals that many companies launching satellite networks don't have clear plans for disposal. Not bad plans, not questionable plans. No plans at all. And the few plans that do exist don't work as flawlessly as promised. In recent years, large chunks of space debris have fallen in Kenya and Uganda. They didn't burn up. They actually reached the ground. Pieces of metal that were supposed to vanish ended up scattered across farmland. But that doesn't mean burned up satellites are safe. This is where the real mystery begins, and it's more alarming than any piece of debris. Starlink satellites are mostly made of aluminum. When 250 kilograms of aluminum burn up high in the atmosphere, at temperatures reaching thousands of degrees, they don't just vanish. They break down into nanoparticles of aluminum oxide, tiny particles of dust that settle in the stratosphere. A study from 2024 calculated that when a typical 250 kilogram satellite burns up, it produces about 30 kilograms of these nanoparticles. Put simply, every 1/8 kilogram of a satellite turns into a chemical agent that speeds up the destruction of the ozone layer, the very layer that shields all life on Earth from harmful ultraviolet radiation. 30 kilograms from just one satellite. Now multiply that by thousands. Now let's talk about scale. Second-generation Starlink satellites don't weigh 250 kilograms anymore. They tip the scales at around 800 each. 3 times heavier, 3 times more aluminum, 3 times more nanoparticles released during re-entry. And these particles don't just settle in a month or scatter in a year. They can linger in the atmosphere for decades, slowly and steadily interacting with the ozone layer. By the year 2030, tens of thousands of these heavy satellites could be orbiting Earth. By 2040, the first generation of these giants will start deorbiting en masse. And by 2050, the stratosphere will carry the legacy of millions of burned-up satellites, their chemical footprint outlasting even those who launched them. You might think at least the sky above us remains untouched, but the sky was the first to suffer. Astronomers are already sounding the alarm. Thousands of satellites reflect sunlight, leaving bright streaks across telescope images. Light pollution has become the new normal. But it doesn't stop there. A study published in the journal Astronomy and Astrophysics revealed that radio emissions from Starlink satellites exceed the limits set by the International Telecommunication Union. Radio telescopes, tuned to pick up the faintest signals from deep space, now catch static from satellite internet. And interference from the second generation of satellites is 32 times stronger than from the first. 32 times. We built telescopes in deserts and on mountain peaks to escape city lights. Now the light comes from above, and there's nowhere left to hide. Here's the bottom line, and it's uncomfortable no matter how you look at it. If satellites don't burn up completely, Their debris falls on people's heads in Africa. But if they do burn up, they poison the very shield that makes life on Earth's surface possible. Both outcomes lead to the same troubling place. We aimed to bring internet access to the entire planet, a noble goal. But the price we pay is a cluttered orbit, blinded telescopes, and an ozone layer that's slowly disappearing. Right now, at this very second, thousands of satellites streak overhead. Each one is counting down its 4 years to cremation, and every single cremation leaves a mark, one that will linger in our atmosphere far longer than any of us. Dust to dust. But this dust doesn't settle into the ground. It hangs above us, unseen, weightless, patient.